What's happening, everybody? Welcome into the Pack-A-Day Podcast Happy Hour. Thanks so much for being here. It's been a little bit of a bummer being a Packer fan lately with all the losing and not having to win for quite a while, but hopefully Green Bay can pick up a win against Minnesota this weekend, and we'll have something positive to talk about next weekend. Hopefully Green Bay can have a couple big performances. Most importantly, just happy to be here, happy talking Packers with you guys. We got to go through it together, right? Like that's one of the I don't know if I want to say fun things, but we got to make it fun, even in times where the team is losing over and over. Like we still have tons to talk about. It's still the Green Bay Packers. It's still always fun to talk about in some capacity. So I really appreciate you guys being here. Jimmy Johnson, I can only assume straight from the Fox pregame show. I can handle being a bad team this year, but I really can't handle losing to the purple team at Lambeau. Big game from Jordan Love coming up on Sunday. There is something that is always special about divisional games, regardless of what the Packers record is, or really what any of the records are, and just trying to beat your rivals, and specifically Minnesota and Chicago. Listen, we might look back at the end of this year and be like, hey, this season sucked, but remember how awesome it was when they beat the Bears in week 1 and the sky was immediately falling for Chicago. That's still a really cool moment this year. Like no matter what, after the entire offseason smack talk from every single Bears fan from every single direction, to go into Chicago week 1 and just have the Packers beat them down, still very satisfying. So regardless of what happens the remainder of this year, what's happened up until this point, Minnesota comes into Lambeau and Green Bay can get a big win, it will still feel very satisfying to some extent. And hopefully, maybe, just maybe, that can actually get Green Bay trending in the right direction as well. Minnesota is a great example of like, hey, sometimes you just need a win, and all of a sudden that win gets things rolling in the right direction. I don't think many of us, myself included, expected Minnesota to beat San Francisco this past weekend, but they did. They got a huge win, and it's crazy. Now, like everyone in Minnesota is like, hey, they can reel off 5 in a row after they beat Minnesota or after they beat San Francisco. So these things, as hard as it seems sometimes just to get that one win, sometimes when that one win does come, sometimes you can all of a sudden get that ball rolling in the right direction. It's like turnovers sometimes. Speaking of which, Green Bay is due for some, in Minnesota being one of the most turnover prone teams in the NFL. Hopefully that's just what the doctor ordered for Green Bay with all the turnovers that Minnesota has this year. Can they at least continue that for one more game, and Green Bay could be the benefactor of some of those huge mistakes that Kirk Cousins and company have been making? That's really probably the key to success. I know turnovers are always the key to success, but in this one where Minnesota's been giving the ball away like, Halloween candy, this is a good game for Green Bay, hopefully to get right in that regard, pick up some turnovers, get a win, and start trending in the right direction. Ski, this one was different, my friend. I had realized I didn't have myself in the chat yet. So that's why I was surprised on this one, because I hit go live first and realized I didn't have myself in the chat. So that's why I was probably looking a little bit surprised in this one. Omar, the final nail in the Packers' coffin if they lose on Sunday. Here's the thing. The coffin was probably pretty nailed shut before the season began, and it just depends on what sort of death you want to die. And what I mean by that is, and I've said it all along, I said in the offseason, I'll say it again right now, I'm not super concerned with the Packers record this year. And I know some people hate that. I've been told that they hate that, and it's a loser's mentality. I don't necessarily care at the end of the day if it's a win or loss, if they are playing better football and they continue to show signs of progress throughout the year. Now, to be fair, I would like to see that result in wins down the road, and hopefully some wins during the course of that time, just to ultimately see wins in the win column, learn how to win, learn to be successful. And I do think winning breeds winning, but I'm not super concerned. Like for the rest of this year, if you told me that they're either, 4-13 or 6-11 or 7-10, anywhere in that, like it doesn't factor in all that much to how I view this team ultimately. Ultimately, they are a losing football team that lost more games than they won. They're not going to the playoffs. They're getting a top 15 draft pick. What I care much, much, much more about is the progress that this team makes and what style of football they are playing. If you told me that they sucked throughout the entirety of this year, but by the last 3 games of the season, they learned how to block and tackle and play cohesive football, and Christian Watson and Luke Musgrave and some of these guys and Jordan Love were balling out of their minds, like, great. That's awesome. They learned through the crap and they got better and they came out at the end of it better. And now hopefully they can carry that over into 2024. That's much more important to me. So from a hey, are they going to make the playoff standpoint? Yeah, the loss to Minnesota probably is the final nail in the coffin. There's still a lot of time left, but I think we probably know where this is headed already. But as far as what expectations were and what I want to see out of this team, there's still a lot of opportunity for progress and for this team to reach its biggest goal, which is hopefully gaining a determination on Jordan Love and hopefully a positive determination on Jordan Love on whether or not he can be the starting quarterback for this team moving forward. Do I think Preston Smith is the biggest trade candidate on this team? That's definitely a possibility. I don't know that I see anyone as being a super high-end trade candidate for players trading away. If you just kind of go through it, right? There's not going to be a quarterback. They could trade Dillon, but I don't know that there's going to be an appetite out there for AJ after the way he's run so far this season. If anything, you could maybe do like a change of scenery trade with Dillon being in his last year. I just don't see it. I think Green Bay probably values Dillon more than the rest of the league values Dillon at this point. But so I don't necessarily see a running back. I don't think Jones is going anywhere. I don't see them trading away any of their wide receivers. They don't have a veteran tight end. Nobody's going to have an appetite for DeGuara. The offensive line, nobody's playing well. Could there be a small appetite for Yash out there somewhere? Maybe. But with Bakhtiari lost for the season, I think they're probably just going to want to keep their depth, even if he's going to be gone in the offseason. So my guess is they don't move him. There's not really a candidate along the defensive line that makes a ton of sense. Could they trade Kenny? They could. Do I see it happening? No, not at all. Edge rusher would be Preston. I just don't think he's played very well, and I don't think there's going to be a huge appetite for Preston either. Devondre Campbell could be a name that they move. Same thing. He's been hurt. If he had a really big week this week and some team made an offer, that could be one, but I don't think they're super excited about the way Isaiah McDuffie's played and now all of a sudden having to start him for the remainder of this year. And they don't have like a lot of, up and coming depth at that position outside of Quay Walker anyway. Corner, like that would have been more of the interesting one if everyone was 100% healthy and like Stokes came back these past 2 weeks and played really well and things like that. That could have maybe changed that discussion where maybe if some team offers something significant for Rasul or maybe even Jair, you listen to it, but Jair's back injury, I don't see him going anywhere. Rasul, just they need corners at this point. They just added 2 to the active roster this week, one from Carolina's practice squad, one from their own practice squad. So I don't see them trading a corner. If they were going to trade a safety, maybe they could have traded Savage, but he is now hurt in on injured reserve and his contract would have really made it so very, very complicated as well. So yeah, I don't know that there's a perfect one, but I guess going through it, Kevin, maybe Preston is the one that makes the most sense just as we kind of went through it. But if I had to guess if Green Bay traded a player away, my guess is they probably do not do so this upcoming week. And yes, Omar, great practice. Like I joked, hang the banner in the Don Hudson Center, 53 out of 53 players practicing. Now that's with Eric Stokes and David Bakhtiari and Tyler Davis and, Darnell Savage and others on IR, but still all of their active players were practicing, which was really great news. All right. Omar, I just recorded a members only podcast talking about this. That'll be up. I'm going to post it pretty much right when we're done here. So that'll be up later today. But yeah, I still can't get over that. But check out the members only podcast for those of you who are members. And I break that down in a little bit greater detail. They're in trouble unless they grow some offensive linemen this week. This is the same thing. Like, these things are weird. Like you will have all of a sudden teams that have struggled in an area all season long, and all of a sudden something clicks or they do something different in practice or they figure something out and all of a sudden the offensive line goes out and plays great or the receivers go out and play great. Like sometimes things click in weird ways. We saw this offensive line play pretty good football early in the season. Was it against Chicago and their crappy defensive line? Yes. But they still played pretty well in that game. They've played some pretty crappy defensive linemen since then and have not looked good. So if they can just kind of get back to at least playing the way they were against Chicago, and you might point out, well, they had Bakhtiari in Chicago, take that piece away. If Elton and Myers and Runyon and Zach Tom and those guys can play like they did against Chicago for the rest of the season, you'll be in a good spot. They just have to get back to playing that way. And hopefully then Jordan can have a little bit more success going through his progressions, not having to look down at the line so often. Hopefully the running backs can gain some success and Jones can play more. Those are the things that we want to see continuously for the rest of the season. And hopefully they just play better this week. Yes, Steno, I believe, said it with a straight face, having the best year of his career. I don't know if he hugged it out with Yash, but here's the thing. Josh might be having the best season of his career. He's never had a good season. So like you can make an argument that he's having the best season of his career. I personally think his rookie year was better, but you can make the argument. It's not like his sophomore year or his rookie year were that great. So if you want to make the argument he's having his best season ever, fine. It's still bad. It's still really bad. So I don't know what that means, but he said he was playing really great. That was what I took more umbrage of. That's more of where I'm at. Ski, if I could take over any role in the Packers org, assuming you were qualified and able to take it on, what position would I pick? The first answer is I'm not sure I'm qualified to take on any role within the Packers organization, but I would 1,000,000%, if you were to hand me any role, if I could have any job in the world, I would be Packers GM. I would be bad at it, I'm sure. I'm sure like you are very happy that I'm not Packers GM, but that is like the freaking dream. Of course, that's of course what you want. I'd probably get fired in 3 years, and there would be fire Andy Herman instead of fire Brian Gutekunst's Twitter handles. But I'll take it to be Packers GM until I get fired for my incompetence. But that would be the literal dream job in all of the world. So not going to happen, though. You guys are lucky. It's going to get a lot better before it gets worse because that O-line isn't getting better anytime soon. You're probably right, but we will see. Why are post-proven players performing poorly this season? That's a lot of P's. MU Wade 3. Big Dwayne Wade fan, it looks like. That's the really hard thing to figure out. I'll go on a little bit of a tangent here, and I apologize if this gets a little bit lengthy, but here's my hypothesis on it. This is my take only. Take it or leave it. That's totally fine. When Matt took over the team in 2019? Yeah. He took over a team that all of a sudden got Za'Darius Smith and Preston Smith, Billy Turner, Adrian Amos, had Aaron Rodgers, Aaron Jones, Kenny Clark. You guys know the names. He took over a very talented roster, a roster that had not been performing well in the final seasons of the Mike McCarthy era, but they added some big time draft picks and some big time free agents that year. And now all of a sudden he had a very talented team and a very veteran led team. Devontae Adams, David Bakhtiari, you guys know the names. What I believe happened is Matt looked at that team, a veteran led team that was ready to compete right then and there. And they had early success and they go to the, divisional round and the NFC Championship that year. And they have a ton of success that year. But if you look at that season, even starting in that year, they basically started having more veteran rest days, having more mental days, having, veteran days off, and really letting a veteran team who needed that time to make sure that their bodies were right come playoff time to have that time. Then 2020 comes and you've got the COVID season. You don't have like all of the off-season activities. So you get ramped up, you go into the season, and everything was a little bit different that year with practice. And again, you've got a veteran team. So you've got a lot of veteran rest days and mental days rather than going through full padded practices or things like that. 2021, it's the same thing. Veteran-led team, a lot of days off on practice, a lot of not going 100%, a lot of mental days, so on and so forth. 2022, it's a lot of the same things, a lot of, again, more focus on the scheme and the playbook and things like that. You add that up through 4+ seasons and all of those, potential days where you could have been practicing that you did more walkthroughs, the days that you could have been using pads, but you decided not to make sure that guys were healthy. You add that up over the course of time, and it's going to have a huge effect on your team long term. And I'm not even necessarily arguing that in 2020 and 2021 with those veteran-led teams, that wasn't necessarily what was best for those teams. It very well could have been. And Matt LaFleur probably had a better pulse on that than anyone else. But you add up the total amount of, and part of it was due to COVID year and things like that too, but you add up in Matt LaFleur's career, the amount of missed practices, the amount of, again, veteran rest days, the amount of days they didn't do pads that they could have, the amount of days that they went with more walkthroughs instead of actual practices, that adds up. And all of a sudden you have players that don't have the practice habits, don't have the attention to detail, aren't great at the fundamentals. And you start seeing players decrease little by little. And all of a sudden you get to 2023 and you don't have an Aaron Rodgers, and you don't have a Devontae Adams, you don't have a David Bakhtiari, you don't have a Corey Linsley, you don't have a Za'Darius Smith, you don't have an Adrian Amos, you don't have a Mercedes Lewis, so on and so forth. And all of a sudden now you've got to train these guys, these younger guys, to be really good right away. And now you've got to almost retrain some of the guys who've maybe gotten into some bad habits over the past couple seasons. And now all of a sudden you see the progress go down, and then you get losses, and losses lead to less motivation sometimes. And you just end up in this spiral. And Green Bay has to find a way to get out of that spiral. And quite frankly, the only way out of it is really, really, really hard work. And you've got to put in all the emphasis and the fundamentals and the attention to detail and all of the technique things that are really suffering right now. Go and listen to the episode with Mike Wall today if you haven't. He touches on the offensive line stuff better than anyone in the world, and you can really get a feel for what is missing with this offensive line. But you take all of that time missed that they could have been doing other stuff over the past couple of seasons, and that adds up very, very quickly. And to me, that's how you get Elgton Jenkins. And part of it's some of the injuries and stuff too, but Elgton Jenkins playing worse now than he was a couple years ago. Jon Runyan Jr., far worse than he was 2 years ago. Jair Alexander not playing like he was when he was playing at an all-pro level, even before the injuries this year. You add those things up and you end up with a team who should have some really good players. You want to look at the vision for this offense really quick, because I think this is worth looking at. People keep saying that, like, hey, Green Bay did not do a good job of setting Jordan Love up for success. Look at all the chaos around him. And with the benefit of hindsight, I agree with you. But remember, I liked in theory the idea of what they were trying to do. You're going to have these young tight ends, these explosive tight ends and wide receivers, your Jaden Reeds, your Christian Watsons, your Romeo Dobbs, your Dontavian Wicks, your Tucker Crafts, your Luke Musgraves grow alongside Jordan Love. I think a lot of us like that idea of getting on the same page together. There was going to be a little bit of a learning curve, but they would be able to come along together. And we were, I think for the most part, okay with that. But what you were teaming it with was a really veteran-led offensive line and running back group. You had running backs in Aaron Jones and AJ Dillon in your backfield that were going to hopefully be able to be your really the backbone and support system while the quarterback and wide receivers and tight ends kind of work things out. And you had a completely starting offensive line back from a season ago with David Bakhtiari, Elgton Jenkins, Josh Myers, Jon Runyan Jr., Zach Tom, Yosh Nijman has started games. It felt like there's no rookies in that group. And we have seen Bakhtiari play at a Hall of Fame level. Elgton Jenkins play at an all-pro level. We've seen Jon Runyan Jr. play at a high starting level, in my opinion, 2 years ago. We've seen Zach Tom this year play at a really high-end starting level. And Josh Myers was the question mark, but in his rookie year, he played at a base level, like a average level. So you're thinking, all right, Hall of Famer, all-pro, average starter, good starter, really good starter. All right, I've got a veteran returning offensive line. I've got veteran running backs who can, kind of be the core of the team. And I've got a young up and coming group of wide receivers and a talented quarterback and tight end. Like, we can live with that. It just hasn't come to fruition in large part because we've seen the regression from some players, specifically Jenkins, Myers, Runyan, Dillon, I would even put in that group. And Jones and Bakhtiari being hurt have been massive, massive issues for this team. And the only one of that group that you were relying on the offensive line and the running backs that's been partially due to injury with Bakhtiari and Jones, but the only one that's been as expected, if not even better, is Zach Tom. And if everyone else is playing worse or is hurt or out, then all of a sudden the one thing that you were set to lean on offense, your line and your running backs, now you don't have that. And now everything is random and chaotic and sporadic and whatever other adjective you want to use. That is a real recipe for disaster. And that's what we've seen on offense so far. So like I said, lengthy spiel. My apologies for going on long about it, but it's a good question. And that's my thoughts on it overall. All right. I have not, but Mike Walsh should absolutely be an offensive consultant. And if not the offensive line coach, he's so freaking smart. I don't say that like for the sake of saying it. There are other people who have that are very smart that I don't think would ever fit in any sort of coaching platform or, be in any capacity a part of the team. The fact that Mike Wall is not a coach for some team right now is beyond insane. That dude is smart, articulate, experienced. It makes zero sense. So yes, I would be all for Mike Wall getting a significant role within this Packers team moving forward. All right. Eugene, thank you so much. Super, super kind of you. Yes, Jordan's growth is paramount. Without a quality QB, they are going nowhere. Yes, that is a huge key, obviously, to the rest of the season. Given Mike Wall's statements, it appears that one of the Packers' problems appears to be the lack of teaching of basics by the coaching staff. Yes, I would agree, and certainly something that I've been saying here as well over the course of the past, couple months or month or so. Omar, we could get into a whole trading Jair conversation, but I don't think that's going to do it, and I don't think they're going to do it, I should say. And the back injury really complicates things. Like if you have a back injury, is he even going to pass a physical? Like those things get very complicated. And like I said, if everything was in a perfect world and he was playing at an extremely high level and he was healthy, then yeah, you could like the Buffalo Bills, I'm sure, with Tre'Davious White being out, especially with the contract that Jair's on, where you're not really taking on anything this season. I think a team like Buffalo would be all over that in a second. But the back injury really complicates it, and I don't see Green Bay trading Jair. Let's see. Gary, yes, I would say Gary and Jair are by far the most valuable trade assets. That there's 0% chance Gary's going anywhere. I mean, it would take something insane. I mean, at least 3 first-round picks, which is the most that you could trade. I don't think they would get that. I don't think he's worth that. Let me say that. But in order for Green Bay even to consider it, it would take something insane. Andy, do you think that Wicks' skill set, including advanced route running and polish, makes him profile as a wide receiver 2 upgrade over Dobbs long term? Watson seemed locked in as our wide receiver 1. Here's what I would say. I want to continue to see Dobbs, Watson, Wicks, and Reed progress on their own volition. And the really nice thing is you don't have to make any determination right now, and you don't even have to make any determination like for a while. Like you've got these guys all under contract for a significant period of time and under team control. So just let them do their own thing. And I would play all 4 of these guys pretty much equal snaps. So, I mean, if you're going, 3 wides, 50 snaps a game, or let's just say 150 snaps, let's make it easier. Let's say there's 160 snaps out there a game at wide receiver. If all 4 of them played 40 snaps a game, I'd be totally cool with that. And you might say you want to see one more than the other. Right now, I just want to see all 4 of them play, and I want to see who steps up. I want to see who ends up being let them become 1, 2, 3, and 4 on their own volition. You don't even have to guess. All 4 play 40 snaps. You're good to go. And then if you do have one that is clearly not as good as the other 3, all right, then move everyone up to 50, 50, 50, and, let the other one play 10. And then, if one of those is better than the other 2, all right, then you go 60, 50, 40, 10, or whatever you need to do. But for now, let them each play 40 snaps a game and just let them kind of sort out on their own. You don't even have to do any guesswork with it. I don't want to lose Devondre unless it's for something good. Can't get stupid with trades, need value in exchange. I agree. I think you want to make sure you're getting value in some return. Trades for the sake of trades aren't going to do anyone any favors. And the good news is Brian's never going to do that anyway. He's probably not going to trade anyone. If it is, he's probably going to get some serious value in return for it. Alex, how much confidence do you have in the staff to teach proper technique on the O-line to help turn this thing around? I don't know how to answer that, Alex. The proof will be in the pudding, which is a super lame and cliche, and I feel like I'm 90 years old saying that. But I feel like we're going to find out if this coaching staff has what it takes to turn this team around and to coach the team the right fundamentals that they need to be able to win with. And I know that's frustrating. I know it's going to take some patience for us to see if that ultimately happens. You're not just going to make wholesale changes in the middle of a season. It's certainly at the beginning of a season when you're 2-4 and only 6 games in. But the early returns, and even going back to last year and then the early returns on this year, have not been great. And you've seen more regression than progress. But I'm willing to see it at least take the rest of this year to see if this coaching staff and individual coaches can turn things around. And I think the wide receiver group, by the way, Dobbs, Watson, Wicks, those guys, I feel like are trending in the right direction. I don't think this is all over the place. I think there's a lot of good things at the wide receiver. Now they need to be in the right spots and they need to get into the playbook more and things like that. That is 100% true. But I think they have all the talent to be successful. And I think the coaches are doing a decent job outside of making sure that they're in the right spots on the routes, which again, the coaches are coaching that. That's just up to the players to go out and execute. But there's things on this team. Tucker Kraft this week. Tucker Kraft looked awesome blocking this past week. There were a couple really, really impressive blocks that earlier in the year and in training camp, he doesn't make ever. He never makes those blocks. So to see that, it shows signs of growth. It shows it's being worked on. So just because the offensive line is one piece of that, that's struggling with technique and some of the issues, it doesn't mean that that is indicative of everything at every position. And if all of a sudden you get through the season and every other position is green and growing and the offensive line still blows and they can't block anyone and their technique sucks, all right, you probably need a new offensive line coach, and you make that determination, you course correct, and you make it as soon as possible. But I do think that for the most part, the season will get played out, and where the issues lie are going to have to be addressed. And however high that goes is where you need to cut it off at the head and make sure that you are making those corrections. But I'm willing to see and the rest of this season to see where that plays out and what this ultimately ends up being. Jimmy, I have no interest in a vet wide receiver this year or next year at this point. I really like Dobbs, Watson, and Reed and Wicks. They just need to develop. Now, if things get worse this season, sure. If something falls in their lap where they can get an insanely talented wide receiver for cheap, sure, whatever, by all means. But right now, I like these 4 wide receivers. The last thing I need is another crappy veteran wide receiver taking snaps from those guys, because I think those guys are going to continue to get better. And in a couple of years, they're going to be veterans and super valuable ones at that. So right now I have no interest, but we'll see what happens. And this team needs to get better in some capacity. So, but wide receivers not high up on my list. All right. Let's go to a couple of these super chats. Embarrassed to say, I never knew how to super chat until now. Also, an around the horn type show with Packers content creators would be so cool. That would be cool, Ski. And thank you so much for the super chat. I'm glad you learned how to use it. But yeah, that would be cool. There's so many amazingly talented people in the Packers sphere. Like, just it's crazy the embarrassment of riches that we have. People that break down the film, people that are super analytical, people that understand the salary cap. There's really, really smart people, and that's why I always love, like, on the happy hours every week, getting 2 new faces in on the happy hours every week and just talking to different people, trying to get different guests through the course of the week. And Luke Braun from Locked On Vikings, I talked to him today. That episode will be up tomorrow. Really, really awesome episode. You're definitely going to want to check that one out. I joked with him. I said I thought being an intelligent Vikings fan was an oxymoron, but apparently Luke Braun proves that they do in fact exist. But really smart episode from him, and I think everyone's going to enjoy that tomorrow. If the season were to end today, what are the most important things the Packers should do? The Packers were to end today. That is a phenomenal question. That's such a hard question to answer, because the whole point of this season is to evaluate everything. And as much as I think a lot of us would like to just jump to a conclusion and evaluate everything on 6 games, we just can't. We just can't evaluate everything through 6 games at this point. Number 1 on my list would probably be making sure Rashawn Gary is signed to a long-term extension in some capacity. I'm going to hire Mike Wall as a new offensive line coach. That's probably number 2. That probably is number 1 on my list. Yeah, that's so hard. And what do they pick right now? What are they, like, pick 9 right now? Something like that, 7 or 9. I'm going to make sure that I utilize my draft pick as best as I possibly can. But yeah, it's so freaking hard right now to make those evaluations through 6 games. Obviously, defensive coordinator is something that needs to get looked at, and I'm going to see what options are out there for that. But I really, really need to see these other 11 games to make all the determinations that need to be made on Jordan Love, on Matt LaFleur, on Matt LaFleur's offense, on Adam Stenavich, on Luke Butkus, on Joe Barry, on even the special teams, on so many of the young players on this roster, what positions I feel good about, what free agents I want back, what veterans I want to release. Like, all of those things are going to be so insanely important to the future of this Packers team that still has a lot of young talent, a lot of upcoming assets, and you can turn this around quickly if you do the right things. But the first thing you have to do right is make your right evaluations this year of what's really good, what's okay but needs to be improved, what's bad, what's awful, and then make those adjustments and make them swift and make them quickly, and then start heading in the right direction. So if it ended today, I would probably say I need to take a look back at everything from those 6 weeks to evaluate what I can. But like I said, I really, really want to evaluate it through the rest of the 11 games. All right. What else we got? Carly, I will. I don't know that I'll ask Matt LaFleur in a press conference how much do you guys spend on proper foot technique, but they definitely need a little bit better footwork on the offensive line. And again, if you haven't listened to Mike Wall and I today on the episode, definitely do so. It'll definitely be a lot of positive takeaways. Spiked Matcha, I appreciate the discourse lately on draft and develop. When do we get to a point where we can properly evaluate if it still works? I think a lot of teams throughout the league are proving that the best teams at drafting are the ones that are going out and getting players that are ready to play right away. The Rashawn Gary one is so interesting, right? Let's just take the Rashawn Gary, Brian Burns conversation. Now, we can take a piece of this aside and say, hey, based on the defense they were running at the time, Rashawn Gary was a much better fit for the defense than Brian Burns was. And that's why they ultimately decided Rashawn Gary was better. Maybe they just had a better draft grade pound for pound on Rashawn Gary, meaning take away the future projections, just who they thought the player was at that time. Maybe they liked Rashawn Gary more at that time. Maybe that's in and of itself fine. But you take Rashawn Gary and Brian Burns. I would very much argue that right now, Rashawn Gary is the better player than Brian Burns. I would very much make that argument. It's close, but I would make the argument that Rashawn Gary is the better player. If you would ask me which player out of Rashawn Gary and Brian Burns through their 4-year career so far, or this is their 4th year, has had the better career, to me, it's easily Brian Burns. And I don't think it's particularly close because it took Rashawn a couple seasons. Now, even ACL aside, even if you take away the time that Gary missed with his ACL and you would have continued his projection through the course of the last year, I would still put Brian Burns well ahead because he was good from day one. He was an impact player from day one, and he's been an impact player ever since. And that's where you get into this value issue of like, yeah, we could get a really great Rashawn Gary by year 3. But now we're closer to the point where we have to pay him this massive contract. We had 2 redshirt seasons in a way where you didn't get high level play out of Rashawn Gary, especially in his rookie year. And you can make the argument when you wanted Rashawn Gary probably to be best was in 19 and 20 in his first 2 years when that team had their best opportunity to win a Super Bowl. So it was great that he was this rotational player on a good team, but like, man, Brian Burns would have probably made a much bigger impact in those 2 years. And that's just a piece of the conversation. I think the bigger piece is you're not seeing like Rashawn Gary is the exception to the rule when it comes to developing players, at least in Green Bay. And I'm not saying players don't get better, but a lot of times if you are like, if the good players are good from day one, and even Zach Tom, we can make it like Zach Tom clearly better in year 2 than he was in year 1. By the end of last year in year 1, he was playing really good football by the end of year 1. And it was just like, you knew he was going to continue to get better. Like there was no real question about it. He was just already really good. So I think that the best teams in the league right now are the teams that are identifying talent that are good to go from day one, that can play from day one. And the way they're going to get better isn't by being this raw ball of clay that needs, all this fundamental work and technique work and to really like build a base up and go from there. They can play from day one. They're really good from day one, and they're going to get better by playing out on the field every week. And I think that's where the teams are having a ton of success. Meanwhile, you don't have the practices. You don't have the, the padded practices. You don't have the live tackling. You don't have the, with the new CBA, all the time, effort, and energy into put into just making players better. That's not where the NFL is at right now. So you better get players who can play right away. And I do think to some extent, I did a whole episode on it last year. I think draft and develop, at least to the extent that it was, is kind of dead. And I don't think it's the best way to go anymore. Now I could make a very strong argument that where this team is from a youth standpoint, there's a little bit more of an appetite for it because you're not winning in like right now or probably even next year. So you can take guys that might be really good in 2 years and have a little bit more patience for that. But still, I think it's at least worth a conversation, and it's a really interesting long-term discussion of, how do you want to build your team and what's the best way to find, evaluate talent and get them in the building and get them playing sooner rather than later. All right. Salty, I'm doing great. I was at the Bucks game last night, and I can tell I've watched Dame for a really long time. He's been one of my favorite basketball players ever, period ever. And seeing him in person was a whole different story. I mean, his movement skills are just crazy, crazy good. Obviously, the shooting, it was a very fun thing to watch in person. So thank you. Thanks for the chat. And yes, it was a very, very fun game last night. Are we any better than we were through week 7 last year? It kind of has the same feel disappointment wise. It looks bad on coaching. I think that's clearly where the frustration is, Nicholas, is, again, we talked about all off season and during the season of there's going to be these ups and downs, right? And you get a win against Chicago, it felt really good. You get a win against the Saints, a comeback win. The first 3 quarters felt awful, but you got the big comeback win, which felt good. You played 3 really good quarters against Atlanta. Sucked to lose the game, but you can point to those 3 quarters and be like, all right, this looks pretty good. But I think as a whole, you look at the season and say it's started to regress, that things haven't looked as good. And if you go back to last year up until now, the individual players, and we just talked about this a minute ago, there's very few players who are playing better than we've seen them in the past. Like I said, Zach Tom playing better right now than he was last year. Rashawn Gary's having a phenomenal season, but it's really, really hard to find players that are showing legitimate signs of improvement. It is not difficult to find players who are playing worse than they have in seasons past. And that is a very huge cause for concern, not just going back to week 7 last year, but for some time now, because there are some of these players that, like Jon Runyan Jr., maybe people will just disagree with me. In 2021, Bakhtiari's out, and then Jenkins goes down with the ACL. I thought Runyan was really good all throughout that season. In fact, he ended with my highest grade on the offensive line that year, in large part due to Jenkins not being able to play the whole season and Bakhtiari being out. But he ended up as my highest graded offensive lineman on the team that year. And if that Jon Runyan Jr. shows up for the rest of the season, that is a really, really freaking good offensive lineman. This Jon Runyan Jr. we've seen this year is my lowest graded player on the team. It's just a night and day difference. And those are the things that are so frustrating that you want to see just change and start going in the different directions so that we can have some positives to take away. Tyree, no, not yet. I understand the frustration. You're 2-4. His record overall as a coach is fantastic. It's trending bad. It's going in the wrong way. You want to see improvement. You want to see how this team responds. There's a lot of season left. There is a lot of season left. And this is a coach that has shown he can win at the NFL level. You give him that time. I would be shocked if any move was even made in the off season, much less during the season. I would think that if he has 2 or fewer wins the rest of this year, there will be conversation of it in the off season. I think if they finish with 4 wins or less on the year, there's going to have to at least be Mark Murphy goes to a couple of his top aides and is like, this is something we need to talk about. I still don't think it happens, but that's when it gets to the conversation. I don't think there's anything that could happen in season that would make it happen. 2 or fewer wins the rest of the year. And I think there will at least be a little bit of a nudge from the front office of like, hey, do we need to do anything here? Even then, I think he's probably back for another year, but he's extremely, extremely on the hot seat at that point. But at this point, I would much rather cheer for things to just turn around and Matt to get this team going in the right direction than I would for him getting fired, because I think he is a capable head coach. I think there are worse options, and the worst thing that you can become, and I think the thing that we have to be really, really careful with is the worst thing that can happen is you start rotating coaches and quarterbacks. If you have to start rotating coaches and quarterbacks, welcome to Chicago Bear land, in Detroit Lion land. Like, that is when things get really, really bad. Now, you have to be careful that you don't settle for meh too. If you've got like Joe Barry, right? The defense has been meh. Has it been terrible? No. Has it been good? No. It's just in meh land. It's mid land. And if you have that happen, sometimes it's easy to be like, oh, we don't need to fire the guy because it's not terrible. Just because it's not terrible doesn't necessarily mean that it's good enough. So you don't want to necessarily get caught in that no man's land either, but you don't want to jump to conclusions. And if you end up in that rotating, like, nope, new quarterback, new coach, new GM, new quarterback, new coach, new GM, new quarterback, like I said, welcome to Chicago Bear land, and nobody wants to be in Chicago Bear land. All right, what else we got? Michael, see, here's the thing, that superpower isn't given. It's not natural. It's not organic. It takes work. It takes time, effort, and energy to put a good offensive line together. And here's the thing. Like, I think a lot of these guys are talented football players. I know people hate it, and I'll just take the L on being wrong for it. When Josh Myers was drafted, and I've said this before, I had a late second, early third round evaluation on him. I didn't think he was overdrafted. Now, everyone and their mom, myself included, had Creed Humphrey graded higher than Josh Myers. So we can have that conversation all day, every day. How you have Myers ahead of him, I have no idea. But I also don't think that Myers was overdrafted at the time when they took him based on his college evaluation in the second round. Like I said, John Runyan Jr. 2 years ago played really good football. Elton Jenkins has played amazing football. Zach Tom right now is playing great football. Even Rasheed Walker has shown signs of playing solid football. These are not completely untalented players. These are not players that are just scrubs. This should be Walker, Jenkins, Myers, Runyan, and Zach Tom. That should be a good enough offensive line in the NFL. Right now, it's not. And that is what is the big issue is you've got to work on fundamentals and footwork and technique and attention to detail. And if they can get to that point, I think you can squeeze a lot more juice out of those 5 guys. But right now, it's overall not good enough. And Zach Tom's the only one that's holding up his end of the bargain right now. Vrabel, Chad. I would want Vrabel to take over. Steno, I want, if I were to, first of all, I think Matt probably just keeps the play calling, but Vrabel would call the plays. Matt would focus more on the overarching team and making sure of all the attention to detail stuff. Steno would go back to the offensive line room, and that's more how I would break it up. But I don't think any of that's going to happen. Maybe Steno gets more time in the O-line room, but I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. Andy, how do we manage expectations for the year close to 500 and not get upset based on what we've seen so far? I've noticed your frustration as well. Again, the frustration isn't with the record, and the frustration is with the play on the field and the regression and not seeing signs of progress. If you told me they were 2-4, but Luke Musgrave was hitting seam routes, Christian Watson looked like he did at the end of last year, some of those sort of things, like we were seeing real tangible progress. Cool. I'm fine with 2-4. Maybe a couple balls bounced the wrong way. And I've said it before, like, let's say that a ball bounces Green Bay's way in a couple different games and Green Bay beats the Broncos and they beat Atlanta and they're 4-2 right now. Heck, maybe they even beat the Raiders. Maybe they're 5-1 just because a ball bounces their way, it goes the other way. They're 5-1. I don't feel great about, I don't feel any different about this team from where they're at from a fundamental and overall standpoint, from a process standpoint, from a practice standpoint, from a technique standpoint. It's great that they're 5-1. I'm excited they're 5-1. There's certainly a much better buzz and level of positivity around the team, but all the stuff that's broken is still broken. Even if they get a couple balls that bounce their way and they end up 5-1 instead of 2-4. So that's where my frustration is. I think managing expectations is try not to get too high. If they win this week against Minnesota, maybe they win by 2 touchdowns, maybe something crazy. My advice would be don't get too high. All of these issues that still exist aren't going to get cured by one 14-point win over Minnesota. I don't think that's going to happen anyway, but even if it does, let's not get too high over it and be like, all right, back to the playoffs. Let's talk about playoffs. It's probably still going to take some time. The same thing I would say is if they lose by 14 to Minnesota, I still think we need to be a little bit cautious of trying to ride the wave too much. No, that would be 4 games in a row and a really bad loss at home. So I get it's going to feel much worse than the maybe 14-point win would feel better, but still try to keep a longer term approach. Understand that it's probably never as high or never as low as it quite feels like, and that there's still a lot of season left for improvement. But the expectation should be process improvement, overall improvement, and progress on this team as a whole. That's where the expectation should lie. And again, the frustration isn't 2-4. If you would have told me they were 2-4 going in, I would have been like, yeah, that's more than possible. I'm not upset by that. 2-4 with losing 3 straight, playing worse football in the last 3 weeks than they did in the first 3 weeks, and not seeing significant signs of progress. That's where the frustration is. And that's what should not be acceptable. I'm willing to give accident forgiveness on the record, not willing to give accident forgiveness when it comes to the play on the field. And the play on the field has been mostly just really, really bad. Do they have enough practices to improve the Mike Wall wants? Seems just like a different league now. Yes, they have enough practices and practice time to get what Mike Wall wants to get accomplished. It's just footwork, attention to detail, technique, hands, all of it, and just practicing the way that you need to play in games. And yes, there's plenty. Like, even the practices that media is open to, that's not all they do. There's so much stuff. When you go into the locker room, they have their agenda up on the TV screen of everything that the players do and where they need to be through the course of the day. It is crazy. Like, I don't know if people just think that players go lift weights, do a 1.5 hour practice, meet with their coaches a little bit, and like go home. These are like long, long days for these guys every single day during the season. They have a ton to go through. They've got walkthroughs, they got practices, they got everything. There is a ton of time they spend in that building. There is tape study, all of it. So there's plenty of time to get across everything that any coaching staff needs to get across. Jonathan, I do think that this will self-correct over time. Both of your things are right. It very much needs to be emphasized. I'm sure that it is being emphasized, but it will not just automatically self-correct. But I do think that stuff will continue to get better and better over time. These are good wide receivers. I think they're very much going to figure it out. There is some complexity. When I've used this in the past, but Tyler Merritt's, the old Badgers offensive lineman who played for the Tennessee Titans when Matt LaFleur was offensive coordinator. When Matt got hired, I interviewed him on the show and I said, what's the hardest position to learn in Matt LaFleur's offense? And without hesitation, he said wide receiver. Said wide receiver is the hardest position to learn in that offense. These are young wide receivers. They are still learning it. Even the Dobbses and Toures and Watsons were in it for the second year. There's a ton to learn. They cross-train all of those guys on all the different wide receiver positions. Your head's going to spin a little bit. That will settle down. They'll get better and they'll be in the right spots moving forward. I guarantee it. All right, a couple more. Richard, how do I avoid burnout? Man, I get to talk about the Packers 365 days a year. I don't know what I would possibly rather be doing in life. If I get burnt out from talking Packers 365 days a year, I will get burnt out by anything, any other job. This is a dream. This is something I enjoy doing. There are days where it's a lot more fun and it's a lot easier. There are days where it's a little bit more of a grind. But at the end of the day, like, I'm not, I'm it's not like I'm out in the trenches doing crazy work. It's not like I'm doing any heavy lifting. My back doesn't hurt. Like, this is a joy. And I really appreciate you guys all supporting me and being a part of this so that I can do this 365 days a year, because I am very blessed and lucky to do so, to say the least. Lee, I don't think so. I don't think so. I think there's going to be a worse team like Carolina. If we lose the rest of our game, Carolina picks up one win. It would only take one other win for us to get the tiebreaker with them. I'll say if they lose the rest of their games, I think they would probably get the number 1 overall pick. I think they probably would. I don't think there's any chance they lose the rest of their games. Like, they'll luck into probably 2 more wins, if nothing else. They've got some bad teams still on their schedule, Chicago, Carolina, some other ones. So I don't think they're going to get the number 1 pick. I think they could very realistically get a top 5 pick. But I'm not hoping that. I'm hoping that they turn things around and get this going in the right direction. Jesse, I would extend him. Long-term deal. Make sure he's the best player on the team. And he's a really good football player. Really, really good football player. So yeah, he's not going anywhere. We're getting that deal done sooner rather than later. Max, didn't get to see Aaron Jones. I was only at 1 practice this week. I've had a crazy week. But even then, we don't get to see a whole heck of a lot anyway. Practices for media, it's training camp is totally different, where you get to see everything basically. In season, you get to see walkthrough, and then Wednesday and Thursday, you get to see individual drill, and then they kick you out. And then in Friday, you just get to see the warm-ups, like them stretching is all you get to see. So literally going to practice Wednesday, Thursday, and especially Friday, you're basically just taking attendance of who's practicing and who's not. You are a glorified substitute teacher going down your list on the roster and be like, oh, yep, he practiced. Oh, he's not practicing. He's with the rehab group. He practiced. That's why you're not getting any tweets from any media members of like, oh, wow, so-and-so looked amazing at practice today. It's like, you're just taking attendance. That's all you're doing. So, yeah, we didn't get to see a ton of Aaron Jones. All right, one more maybe. Vero, I hope you're right. I will love to have Green Bay have a good game at home. That would be very nice. Yes. Wood said Jones told him he's feeling the best he has, though. And he did say something too of like, if he's not 100% this week, he completely feels like he's going to be 100% next week. But then Matt LaFleur also said he didn't think Jones is close to 100% yet. So, take whatever you want for a grain of salt. Yeah. As someone who does, all right, I'll end with this one. As someone who does a daily podcast, have you gotten listening to your own voice? As someone who does a daily podcast, I'm assuming have I gotten used to listening to my own voice? More than when you first do it, it's very, very weird. So yes, I would say I probably have. When you first do it, I don't think anyone likes listening to their voice, but now when you have to edit as many episodes as you do of stuff, it starts becoming second nature. So yeah, I will say you do start getting used to it a little bit more, but there's still a little bit of a weirdness to it. And I don't like listening to myself. I don't think anyone likes listening to themselves, but you do get used to it a little bit more. Do I think Devondre plays this week? I think he will. He practiced. I mean, when you practice on Tuesday, Monday, that's whatever day was that when he practiced early in the week, that's a good sign. Or I guess it was Wednesday, but yeah, he practiced early in the week. I think he will practice. I think he will play this week, which would be a really good sign for Green Bay. Thomas, obviously, yes, he is. All right, guys, thank you so much. That's going to do it for me. I got to get out of here. I'm running way behind on a million different things. Brand new members only episode coming up right after this. I'm going to upload it as soon as I'm done here. I will see you guys tomorrow. Check out the episode with Luke Braun tomorrow. Check out the episode with both Mike Wall and then another one with Carmen Vitale that were uploaded today. You guys won't be disappointed. I will see you guys soon. Enjoy the game on Sunday. Win, lose, or draw. It's always Packers football. We always carry the G. I'll see you guys soon. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.